Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 330, The Introvert's Route to Respect. It probably comes as no surprise to you that after the last two episodes, we'd naturally move on to respect. I say naturally as though it's really obvious to everyone, but I've been reminded quite recently that it's not obvious to all. You're not in my head 24/7, and I doubt you'd want to be either. It's a busy old place with not much downtime. So as a reminder, I've recently talked about how drive without direction risks becoming drift. An episode that a few people told me got them rethinking whether their busyness was really productive. Then most recently, I unpacked the concept of the vulnerability hangover and the impact it can have on us. This proved to resonate so much with people that a couple of C-suiters reached out to me to let me know how it had helped them. What naturally follows for me is thinking about respect, both by me for me and the respect I give to others. Although they are inextricably entwined, I'll tackle each separately and then talk about their relationship to each other. Before that, though, I want to start by referencing Richard Stennett's work from his book Respect in a World of Inequality. As you might expect, central to his thesis is that the vulnerable are often left feeling inadequate. Recognise that feeling? I know I do. And as a reminder, vulnerability in my mind is not a weakness. In fact, it's a quality I very much admire. And to be clear, I'm not talking emotional vomit or glitter bombs here, though. In a recent newsletter, I talked about the many benefits of being able to be vulnerable. They include creating connection. I think it's fair to say that we can all relate more readily to people who present more than the sanitized, supposedly perfect, shiny side of themselves. Bolstering courage, which in itself encourages others to be braver. Behaviour breeds behaviour, remember. And improving emotional health, as keeping things bottled up takes us down a number of dangerous roads that I don't recommend. What I also said in that newsletter, though, was that if I have the right to be vulnerable, it comes with responsibilities, as do all rights, actually. But in biased systems where we as introverts are routinely overlooked and undervalued, where we are categorised as lacking ambition because we don't make a big hoo-ha about our aspirations, and where we're relied on but not credited, we end up feeling vulnerable for being who we are. All of which means taking responsibility is much more difficult, as we often feel on the back foot. I'd argue that this kind of responsibility is a shared responsibility, but the ones perpetuating the bias won't see it that way. And I trust very few of them to have the skills or the capacity to hold the space while I am in a vulnerable state. Most close the door, look away, or tell me to come back when I've got a hold of myself again. And they call themselves leaders. So this brings us neatly back to respect, and I'll start with self-respect, because honestly, I think it's sycophantic pretense to say you respect others when you don't respect yourself. I think we have Susan Cain, author of Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, to thank for pointing out that self-respect is the antidote to the pressure to performative extroversion. So when we respect ourselves, we stop colluding with the systems that catalyse our vulnerability. We call out the biased behaviour and feedback that would have us believe there is something wrong with us. And we hold our values and self-worth high. How else will people spot it? They certainly won't notice it if we're hiding it away behind compliance. So chances are, to embody self-respect, you'll need to rebel against the many rules you learned in childhood about what being a nice boy or girl or child meant, the very behaviours that got you the compliments. And as an adult in the workplace, you're responsible for your behaviour and your self-motivation, rather than being reliant on external validation. It's a nice bonus if you get it, but it's more important to know you've done a good job and can hold your head high. This is where the advocacy piece comes in, as those who crave validation and praise are also the ones who typically get the opportunities. Doesn't seem right, does it? I think it's because as introverts we're typically lower maintenance, and as one of my C-suite clients, Rob, said, we don't blow smoke up the boss's arse. The end result? We get overlooked and we're not their favourite. Don't be tempted to play their game though. Find ways to showcase your achievements authentically instead. You'll find that reinforces self-respect wonderfully well. So along with rebelling against those learned childhood behaviours, you'll also need to advocate for yourself, to operate from a position of rightful agency, and to hold your boundaries with intention. This means honouring our needs proactively rather than waiting until we're depleted and then struggling to claw our way back to full functioning. It's fair to say that I found all of that pretty challenging in some of the corporate spaces I worked in. The bias was strong, but my self-respect wasn't. The leaders, if I can call them that, were adamant about what needed to be done and when, and yet I featured nowhere in their decision-making process. And I'm not alone in experiencing that. Other introverts I know have found the same thing. And it's so blooming frustrating, isn't it? I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so hot on productive collaboration and co-creation. So how did I finally get out of my own way in the face of all of that? Well, I can tell you for starters, it wasn't easy, and there were times when I questioned the sanity behind my actions. What's made it easier for me to navigate so I confidently embody self-respect is to get really clear on my values. The ways of being that shape my behaviour and enable me to make informed choices. I'm not going to sugarcoat the reality here, though. The self-respect journey is an ongoing one. Since I've been able to be honest with myself, to stop squandering or downplaying my self-worth, and to stick with the pacts or promises I make to myself without abandoning me in the process, it's been a whole different journey. I found that interiority that I talk about so often, where I don't consider myself either superior or inferior. I am me, and I am proud of who I am becoming. I refuse to abandon myself, and if I can do that, so can you. Once I'd made progress on the self-respect front, respecting others became a more wholesome experience. I've never really subscribed to the notion that you have to earn respect. To me, that's a bit like assuming guilt until innocence is proven, the wrong way round. My preference, although I have struggled with this on occasion, is to start with respect just as I start with trust. The fundamental for me when it comes to respecting others is unconditional positive regard, which I learned about somewhere during my psychological studies. The concept comes from the work of Carl Rogers, and it's about leading or offering acceptance without conditions. None of this, "You're okay in my book if you do this or think this way." There's a time and a place for reciprocity, but that's different and comes later. The idea here is that you deserve respect and have worth simply because you're a sentient being. But don't confuse this with weakness, indulgence, or avoidance. Respecting someone doesn't mean we never have the difficult conversations. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that having unconditional positive regard as the basis of respect enables those conversations to be more productive. Rogers was clear that people are more able to grow and take responsibility when they are met with acceptance rather than judgment. So, I may disagree with your choices in life, and I still respect you. I may find your behaviour challenging, but I know you are more than your behaviour. I may need to hold a boundary when I am with you, but that doesn't make you a bad person. Respecting people means not shaming them. Rather, it's about inviting them to understand the impact they are having whilst honouring their worth. So I understand this can be a big ask, especially for those who have been persistently disrespected. The temptation is to bite back and give as good as you got some previous time in your life. But I can assure you, it's made all the easier by starting with self-respect. So the real question here is, what's the first thing you'll do to bolster your self-respect, thereby opening the doors for wider respect? If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.